Welcome, friend. Come closer, not in distance, but in thought. This is not a story told with urgency, but one unraveled in candlelight deliberately, slowly meant to settle into your mind, like falling dust in a forgotten room. Tonight, we are not spectators to war, nor eavesdroppers in a royal chamber. Tonight we enter a space built for quiet minds. We walk among scrolls, among thoughts too delicate for battle, too soft for conquest, but not too soft, it turns out, for destruction. Tonight, our tale begins in the most unlikely of places, a library. But not just any library. This was once the beating heart of ancient knowledge. The Library of Alexandria. A wonder of the ancient world. A place where the wisdom of entire civilizations was gathered and guarded, like flame cupped gently in a scholar's hands. And yet, like flame, it could be and would be snuffed out. But why? Why would a society, proud of its accomplishments, allow the greatest repository of human knowledge to fall into ash and silence? Why would scrolls that held the secrets of stars and bones and language and gods be tossed to fire or abandoned to rot? The answer, as always, is layered. It is never just one spark that starts a blaze. But first, let me take you there. Breathe in. Let your senses fill with the ancient sea air of Egypt's northern coast. The sun hangs low over the Mediterranean, its light scattering like molten gold across the harbor's still waters. Ships, dozens of them, rock in rhythm with the tide, their sails sagging in the breeze. Their decks loaded with papyrus, spices, marble, and men speaking Greek, Coptic, Phoenician, Latin. You step into Alexandria, through one of its massive stone gates. It is a city of straight lines and perfect geometry, designed by minds that thought in angles and sky maps. White limestone buildings line wide streets. Statues of philosophers stand in shaded colonnades. Above all, there is a pulse, here calm, regal, ancient. This is no dusty desert town. This is the intellectual crown of the Hellenistic world, and near the center, on a rise not far from the royal quarter, stands the library. It is not a single building, but a complex, sprawling institution tied to the Mausean, the temple of the muses. Scholars here don't simply read, they live. They dine together, debate in courtyards, and study by lamplight late into the night. The goal is simple, to collect every written work in the known world, every thought, every idea, every voice ever recorded, and they came close. Tens of thousands of scrolls filled its shelves, some say hundreds of thousands. Works from Egypt, Babylon, India, China, Greece, Carthage, lost plays of Euripides, mathematical treatises from Archimedes, medical insights from Persia, maps of stars drawn long before telescopes, even whispers of scrolls that questioned the existence of gods, the nature of time, the shape of the earth. But this is not just a place of preservation, it is a place of competition. Ships that arrived in Alexandria's port were searched by officials, and any books found on board were taken. Not borrowed, confiscated, the originals kept, copies returned. This is how serious the Alexandrians were about knowledge. They believed knowledge was power. But not everyone agreed on who should hold that power. And so, slowly, cracks began to form in the marble. At first, they were ideological. You see, knowledge, no matter how beautiful, can be dangerous. It questions, it challenges, it refuses to stay silent in the face of tradition. In a time where gods were fragile, where empires hung on myth and ritual, too much truth could threaten the whole illusion. Pharaohs tolerated it barely. Greek kings adored it, but only when it flattered them. Roman generals eyed it with suspicion, and clerics, both pagan and later Christian, began to see it as arrogant, uncontrolled, even blasphemous. And so, one scroll at a time, the light began to dim. The first blow came not from hate, but from accident at least. That's what some say. During Julius Caesar's campaign in Egypt in 48 BCE, the Roman general found himself surrounded in Alexandria. To cut off the Egyptian fleet, he ordered the ships in the harbor burned. The fire spread, fanned by dry wind, and leaped to nearby buildings. Some accounts say the docks, others, the warehouses. But many claim the flames reached the library itself. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of scrolls gone in a single night. But Caesar left, Rome moved on, and the library remained damaged, but not destroyed. It would limp forward for centuries more. The next blow came from indifference, as power shifted from the Hellenistic dynasties to Roman governors. The library became less a jewel and more a relic. Funding waned, interest faded. Scholars fled to safer cities. New rulers saw little reason to support a temple to foreknowledge, but still, it survived. Barely. Then came something worse than fire. Something more thorough than budget cuts. Intolerance. By the 4th century, Christianity had swept across the Roman Empire, and with it came a new definition of truth: singular, divine, infallible. No longer was truth something to be searched for, debated, wrestled with. It was handed down, declared absolute. And many saw the pagan philosophies and ancient scrolls of the library as dangerous temptations, remnants of a sinful, heretical world. In 391 CE, under orders from Emperor Theodosius I, all pagan temples in Alexandria were to be closed or destroyed. One by one, the temples fell, torn down by mobs or repurposed by zealots. The Serapeum annex of the library, and possibly its last stronghold, was attacked. Statues smashed, scrolls burned, priests murdered. Whatever survived was scattered. The library, as it once existed, was no more, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was loud with loss, the loss of questions never answered, the loss of stories never told, the loss of discoveries centuries ahead of their time. But perhaps the most tragic part: no one knows exactly when it died. There was no single day, no grand inferno that marked its end. The Library of Alexandria faded not in fire alone, but in forgetting, slowly, quietly, scroll by scroll, thought by thought. It simply stopped being remembered. There's a strange pain in that, isn't there? That the greatest library of the ancient world didn't vanish in glorious tragedy, but in bureaucratic disinterest, religious fear, and political silence. And yet there is something else here, a whisper, a lesson, that knowledge real, fearless, knowledge is fragile. It must be protected, not just from flames, but from neglect, from fear, from the quiet comfort of not knowing. So tonight, as you drift into rest, imagine that you are walking once more through those halls. Imagine shelves taller than any man, packed with scrolls of red ink, gold script, ideas so vast they make your chest ache. Imagine you hold one in your hand. What does it say? You'll never know. No one will. But that doesn't mean the light is gone. Somewhere in the world, a student opens a book. A thinker asks a dangerous question. A writer drafts a new idea. The fire still flickers. And as long as stories like this are told, not for glory, not for profit, but for remembering, then the Library of Alexandria still breathes. Softly, quietly, like candlelight in the dark. So let us stay in that moment, in the quiet that comes after loss. The kind of silence that's not peaceful, but hollow, like something that's been taken and hasn't yet been mourned properly. The Library of Alexandria is gone now, or nearly so, and the question lingers, heavier than the smoke that once curled through its stone vaults. What did we lose? But perhaps we should ask first, what had we gained? Because before the flames, before the mobs, before scrolls were used to warm the hands of soldiers and sermons, there was brilliance here, a light not of gold or fire, but of thought, of understanding. And it shone far beyond Egypt's shores, to understand what was lost. We must meet the minds who made the library more than walls and parchment. There was Eratosthenes, the librarian, who measured the earth with little more than shadows, and logic and came astonishingly close to its true circumference. He didn't have satellites, no airplanes, just 2 sticks, 2 cities, and a mind trained to wonder. There was Hypatia, the philosopher and mathematician who walked these marble halls centuries later, robes brushing across floor mosaics, her voice echoing in lecture courtyards as she taught astronomy, number theory, and ethics. A woman in a man's world, a pagan in a Christian empire, a scholar who became a symbol. There were astronomers who charted the planets, geographers who mapped continents they'd never seen, physicians who dissected bodies when it was forbidden, poets who wrote in languages long since forgotten. The air in the library was thick, not just with dust, but with the residue of possibility. And yet, no fortress can stand forever, not when its enemies come not only with fire, but with silence. You see, the library didn't just burn in a single blaze. That's the myth, the theater of it. The truth is slower, sadder. It died in phases. First came the neglect, quiet and polite. When royal money shifted to war, when scholars found fewer scrolls copied and fewer lamps lit in their chambers, when the great minds stopped arriving by ship, choosing safer cities, newer schools, then came the suspicion, whispered in temples and shouted in forums. What need have we for Greek thinkers? What truth can pagans teach us? Why store the words of long-dead poets when we have a new truth now, given by gods or emperors? Then came the hostility, organized, furious, righteous, and with it, the final blows. Let's return now to Hypatia, because her end is the library's end too, in a way. She was Alexandria's last great scholar, daughter of Theon, one of the last men to hold the title of librarian. She had been raised among scrolls, taught to think with clarity, to debate with elegance, to reason without fear. She wrote on conic sections, on the motion of celestial bodies, on numbers that danced between known and unknown. And she taught freely pagans, Christians, Romans, anyone willing to learn. But her very existence became a problem. In a city torn between old gods and new faiths, between imperial rule and local zealotry, she was seen as a symbol of the past, of ideas that didn't bow to doctrine, of reason in a world turning toward revelation. And so, in the year 415 CE, during a Lent season in March, Hypatia was stopped in the street by a mob. Not a mob of bandits or soldiers, but of men who claimed to be faithful, followers of a bishop, who believed her a threat. They dragged her through the streets, into a church. They stripped her of her robes, of her dignity, of her flesh. She was flayed alive with tiles and oyster shells, her limbs torn apart, her body burned outside the city. They said she was a witch, that she led men astray. But what they really feared was her mind, her calm defiance, her refusal to stop thinking. With her death, the final candle of Alexandrian scholarship flickered out, and so, the library did not fall in one night. It fell over centuries, first by accident, then by apathy, then by zeal. But let us not forget what it stood for, because the Library of Alexandria was more than scrolls and scribes. It was a dream, a radical idea that the entire knowledge of the human race could be gathered in one place, not to be controlled, not to be hoarded but to be understood. It was a belief that truth could be pursued without permission, that understanding was sacred in itself, that the world, vast and mysterious, could be explored not just with ships, but with thought. And that is why it was feared, because the scrolls held dangerous things, not just facts, but questions. Questions about the heavens, about gods, about power, about the shape of justice, and the structure of the soul, and the powers of the day, whether imperial or ecclesiastical, could not tolerate too many questions, so the scrolls burned, or were buried, or forgotten, and humanity took a step backward in the dark. But not all was lost, because knowledge, like seeds, can scatter. Some scrolls were copied before the fire, smuggled away to other cities, Byzantium, Antioch, Carthage. A few fragments even made it to the Islamic world centuries later, where scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba would rediscover them, translate them, and build upon them. And from there, centuries later still, they would find their way into Europe, into the Renaissance, into the very world we now inhabit. So no knowledge cannot be destroyed forever, but it can be delayed, it can be wounded. Think of it like a great river. The Library of Alexandria was a dam trying to collect and hold all the waters of human thought. And when it broke, the river did not disappear, but it did scatter. It spilled into strange places, took time to gather again, and we are the beneficiaries of what survived. When you read a book, when you ask a question that others fear, when you seek truth for its own sake, you are honoring what that library once stood for. And perhaps that's the real legacy, not what was lost, but what it taught us to cherish. Because now we know what happens when curiosity is seen as dangerous, when truth is silenced by power, when scrolls are burned, not because they are false, but because they might be true. So remember this: the library is gone. Its columns are dust. Its scholars are shadows. Its scrolls, ash. But its spirit, that still lingers in whispered questions, in flickering screens, in the hush of libraries around the world, in the hearts of those who believe that no idea is too dangerous to explore, and no truth too ancient to matter. So as you drift now slowly, softly into rest, imagine this: you stand once more in those ancient halls. The marble beneath you is warm from the sun. The air smells of ink and wax. In your hand, a scroll fragile, curled at the edges, whispering secrets in a language older than time. You unroll it slowly, and though the words are lost to history, something stirs in your mind, a thought not your own, a connection across centuries, a moment of understanding. And then, the candles dim. The halls fade, but the thought remains, softly glowing, gently burning, just like the memory of the library itself. Stay with me a little longer. We are not yet done wandering through the echoes of Alexandria. The scrolls may have burned, the scholars silenced, the stones repurposed, but the questions, the questions, they linger. They refuse to die, like smoke that never clears, like ink that stains the soul. We've stood among ash and ruin. We've witnessed how curiosity was strangled, not by chaos, but by calculated silence. And yet even now, something moves beneath the debris. Something stirs. Because even in loss, something was left behind. Not the scrolls, not the marble, not even the memory of names long lost to sand and sea. What remains is the idea that knowledge belongs to no one and to everyone. That the mind is a sacred space. That no empire, no doctrine, no fire can extinguish the hunger to understand. And it is here, in the aftermath, that our story shifts not to redemption, not yet, but to this strange, winding afterlife of Alexandria's wisdom. Because knowledge is not like gold. It does not sit neatly in vaults. It does not rust in coffers. It flows, it seeps, it clings to hands and tongues and dreams. And even after the library fell, its spirit took root in other places. Let us drift now not forward, but outward too. The desert to Baghdad. Centuries after Alexandria's final breath, a new city rose in the east. A city built not for conquest or worship, but for learning. It was called the House of Wisdom Beit, Al-Hikmand. It became, in many ways, Alexandria's spiritual heir. Here, under the Abbasid caliphs, scrolls were gathered once more, not by conquest, but by translation. Works of Greek, Persian, Indian origin were rendered into Arabic. Texts that might have perished in obscurity were given new life in script, flowing like poetry. Ptolemy's astronomy, Hippocrates' medicine, Euclid's geometry, Plato's dialogues. They were not merely copied, they were questioned, debated, improved upon. The Muslim world did not inherit Alexandria's fear of knowledge. For a time, it embraced it, celebrated it, fed it. Scholars in Baghdad plotted the movements of the stars with astonishing precision. In Cairo, physicians dissected the human body in search of causes and cures. In Cordoba, philosophers wrote of ethics and reason with eloquence that still stirs the blood. And while Europe forgot sinking into the shadows of its so-called Dark Ages, these distant heirs of Alexandria kept the flame alive. But even here, the light flickered, because no society remains open forever. And eventually, suspicion crept in once more. Doctrines hardened. Thinkers were silenced. Books were locked away. And again, the great river of thought slowed to a trickle still. It was enough, because something miraculous had happened. The knowledge had moved by the 12th century. Europe, hungry, stumbling, half-blind, began to reach out again. It found, in the libraries of Andalusia, the embers of thought long thought lost. Through the Crusades, through trade, through wandering scholars and monks, ancient texts were retranslated. This time into Latin. It was as if a spell had broken. The minds of the West began to awaken. slowly, fitfully, but undeniably. This was the beginning of the Renaissance, and behind every sketch by Leonardo, every proof by Galileo, every challenge by Copernicus, every law by Newton, you can hear it, that faint, persistent whisper. Not in Latin, not in Arabic, not even in Greek, but in silence. The silence of Alexandria, broken now only by ink and breath. It is tempting to romanticize this arc, to pretend that knowledge simply rises again and again, that nothing is ever truly lost. But that would be a lie, because for every scroll that was copied, 100 vanished. For every scholar who preserved an idea, countless others died before they could speak. For every translation that reached a new mind, there were centuries of silence in between. History does not always recover what it loses. Sometimes it simply forgets that it ever had it. So let us take a breath here, and hold, for a moment, the true weight of the loss. It is not just the loss of ancient science or forgotten poetry. It is the loss of direction, we ask. What would the world look like today if Alexandria had survived? If every scroll had been preserved, every question pursued without interruption, every discovery passed on without obstruction? Would electricity have arrived 1,000 years sooner? Would vaccines have saved millions long before modern medicine? Would we have crossed oceans and planets before kingdoms and churches had learned to fear maps? Would our wars have been fewer, our understanding deeper, our cruelty, dare we say, it less? No one knows. But the ache of that question remains. Because when you destroy a library, you do not just burn paper, you burn potential. In Alexandria's, potential was almost infinite. There is something deeply human in that kind of loss. Not tragic in the way stories are tragic, but tragic in the way life is imperfect, wasted, beautiful, and broken all at once. And that, perhaps, is why the library still haunts us. It is not just history, it is memory, a wound we carry not in our minds, but in our species. But the story does not end in ash, because for all that was destroyed, the idea survived. Today it lives in the great repositories of the world: the British Library, the Library of Congress, the Bibliothèque de France, in university stacks and digitized archives, in minds still curious enough to ask why. But more than that, it lives in every quiet moment of learning, in a child's question, in a researcher's late-night scribble, in a reader's underlined passage, in a whispered classroom conversation that ignites a spark no test can measure. Alexandria lives there, and yet, we must be honest. Even now, the fire is never far. Libraries still burn, books are still banned, scholars still silenced, knowledge still made dangerous by those who fear its power. And so, the lesson of Alexandria is not finished. It is warning and invitation, both at once. A warning that knowledge, once lost, is almost impossible to recover. That the minds we silence today may have carried tomorrow's answers. That curiosity must be protected, even when it is uncomfortable. And an invitation to build again, to gather, to preserve, to question not because it is profitable or safe, but because it is right. Imagine, for a moment, that you could return. That through some magic of time or dream, you could walk once more through those ancient halls, past colonnades warmed by the Egyptian sun, past scholars lost in debate, past scribes dipping reeds into ink made of soot and water and intention. And there, resting on a cedar shelf, is a scroll. It bears no title, no author, only the weight of the question it contains. You take it in your hands, you open it, and what you find is not an answer, but a mirror, a reflection of your own time, your own fears, your own fragile light. Because the lesson of the Library of Alexandria is not just about the past, it is a story of now, of how easily we lose what we most need, of how knowledge is never safe, but always sacred, and of how the future depends, always, on what we choose to preserve. So let this story stay with you not as a bedtime tale, but as a living thought. Let it breathe inside you as you rest. Let it soften your fears and sharpen your mind. And when you wake, let it remind you that every page you read, every question you ask, every truth you dare to seek, keeps the flame alive, quietly, gently, but eternally. Still with me? Good. Let us continue to drift not backward, not forward, but deeper. Into the spaces between history and silence. Between memory and myth. Between what we know and what we feel might have been. The Library of Alexandria, though long reduced to myth and ash, continues to glow not with flame, but with yearning. Because this story is not only about the past, it is about us, our decisions, our blindness, our possibilities, you see. Civilizations don't just lose knowledge by accident. They choose to, slowly, reluctantly, sometimes even proudly. We bury it beneath doctrine. We burn it in the name of purity. We neglect it because it makes us uncomfortable. And when the silence becomes complete, we pretend it was never there at all, but the ruins always whisper. Let us return, now not to Alexandria, but to ourselves. Imagine walking through your own city not as it is, but as it might be remembered, 2,000 years from now. Imagine archaeologists brushing dust from your sidewalks, piecing together the meaning of glowing screens, faded signage, fragmented books. What will they say? We knew. And what will they say we chose not to know? Because knowledge is not only what is recorded, it's what is allowed to be recorded, what is encouraged to be remembered, and more often, what is quietly erased. Ask yourself, what ideas are we ignoring today? What truths are being silenced, not with fire but with laughter, with dismissal, with the sheer noise of distraction? Because history teaches one thing above all else, when we stop paying attention, the burnings begin not with torches, but with apathy. So let's walk through the library, again not the real one, but the one inside us. The imagined Alexandria. The dream that still flickers beneath our modern skin. Here. In this internal library, the shelves are full. There are scrolls written in languages no longer spoken. Equations drawn by hands that never lived. Philosophies not yet born. Songs not yet sung. Here we preserve not only what was, but what might have been. One scroll holds a cure that was never discovered, because its discoverer died in poverty. Uneducated, unnoticed. Another holds a map to a continent, because it was too far, but because no one was allowed to leave. Another contains the writings of a woman born in the wrong century, whose voice was never recorded, whose thoughts never reached paper. This is the library of lost possibilities. It is more vast than Alexandria ever was, and it grows every day not with new discoveries, but with missed chances, and still. Within this imagined place, there is hope, because for every scroll that lies unwritten, another begins to form, slowly, tentatively, in the minds of children, asking why, in the late-night notes of thinkers who will never be published, in the silent conviction of those who question, even when told not to. It is tempting to mourn Alexandria as a tragedy that happened once, a singular fire, a single loss, but the truth is harder and more urgent. Alexandria burns every day. Whenever a voice is silenced, whenever a question is mocked, whenever education is denied, whenever truth is twisted for power, whenever curiosity is punished instead of praised. And yet despite it all, something endures, because the hunger to know is older than kings, stronger than fear, quieter than tyranny, but far, far more persistent. It lives in every one of us, and sometimes it flares bright enough to be seen. Let's remember the guardians, the quiet ones, the scribes who copied scrolls by candlelight, the translators who moved meaning across languages like bridges over rivers, the teachers who taught in secret, the rebels who wrote in code, the poets who smuggled ideas into verse. They were not warriors, not rulers, not saints, but they were the keepers of the flame, and because of them, some fragments survived. Because of them, we have slivers of Euclid, echoes of Archimedes, glimpses of Sappho and Galen and Aristotle, incomplete, distorted, sometimes barely more than names, but still here, still whispering. So we must ask, what kind of guardians are we? Do we protect what matters? Do we challenge what must be challenged? Do we allow the awkward truths to sit beside the comfortable ones? Do we make space for the unknown, the inconvenient, the fragile insights that might bloom into brilliance? Or do we, as so many before us, Turn away when the questions get too heavy. Alexandria is not a ruin. It is a test, one we face over and over, every generation, and we are failing it still. Consider how we treat our own knowledge. We bury it beneath profit. We wall it off behind passwords and paywalls. We dismiss the thinkers who speak in unfamiliar tongues. We teach children how to pass exams, not how to think. We rewrite history to flatter ourselves. We are not burning scrolls, but we are letting them rot in silence. And yet, despite everything, the dream of Alexandria remains. Fragile, persistent, beautiful. Because every time a mind opens freely, the library is reborn. Every time someone reads not to pass time, but to seek truth, the library is lit again. Every time someone questions not to provoke, but to understand, the flame brightens. It doesn't take stone columns or vaulted ceilings. It takes only a willingness to wonder. So tonight, as the world quiets, and the flicker of sleep draws near, let this thought settle in you gently. You carry the library now. You are its walls, its shelves, its keeper, every memory you hold, every story you pass on, every truth you protect, every injustice you challenge, every child you encourage to ask why. These are scrolls no fire can touch. You may not hold parchment in your hands, but you hold something older, deeper, more resilient, a mind that questions, a heart that remembers, a soul that seeks. Alexandria was not just a building. It was a possibility, and now, that possibility lives in you. So carry it carefully. Let your thoughts be curious. Let your words be gentle. Let your silence never serve fear. The world may burn its libraries, but if enough of us remember what they stood for, the light will never truly go out. Not entirely, not forever. Still awake. Then stay with me, just a little longer. The air is cool now. Time stretches like parchment unrolled under candlelight. And in this hour, this soft, liminal hour between waking and dreaming, we return once more to Alexandria. Not to mourn it, not to praise it, but to ask, gently, what became of the fire? Not the fire that devoured scrolls, but the fire within, the one that yearned to understand, the one that asked why the stars moved, why the body ached, why the soul stirred. Because that flame did not die in the ashes. It traveled. It drifted across deserts, hidden in verse and symbol. It boarded ships and crossed seas, tucked into satchels and whispered in shadows. It sat quietly in the minds of those who would not let the silence take root. And tonight, in the stillness of your room, it flickers again, in you, because even as Alexandria fell, its spirit survived. Not in marble, but in movement. And that movement did not stop with Baghdad or Cordoba or Florence. It did not pause at printing presses or microscopes or moon landings. It presses forward still, quietly, tirelessly, like a river beneath a frozen surface. And now it flows through wires, through clouds of data, through blinking screens and whispered code. Yes. Let us speak of the present now, because the new Library of Alexandria is not bound by stone or scroll. It floats into space with no walls. It is housed not in columns, but in servers. It exists in fragments scattered across the globe, connected by light, and digital, fragile, and growing. In some ways, it is greater than anything the ancients could have imagined. You can summon the thoughts of 100 generations with a whisper to your phone. You can read the stars with your fingertips. You can learn any language, walk any ruin, hear any symphony, without ever rising from your chair. The collective knowledge of humanity is, at least theoretically, within reach. And yet, there is something uneasy here. A paradox. Because even as we build this vast digital library, we are haunted by the same ghosts. We may not burn parchment, but we delete. We censor. We distort. We forget. We drown in information, but starve for wisdom. We build algorithms to guide our attention, but we let them narrow our vision. We value speed over depth, virality over truth, noise over meaning. The new Alexandria glows brightly, but sometimes it feels hollow. Because knowledge is more than access. It is attention, care, integrity. A scroll unread is as silent as a scroll burned, so the question returns softly, persistently. What will we preserve? Will our future archaeologists sift through corrupted drives and find anything worth remembering? Or will they see only the echoes of what we could have been? It is easy to blame technology, but the fault lies deeper. The tools are not the danger. It is how we use them, or how we dan single quotes. Let me show you something. There are still scrolls being written, not with ink, not on papyrus, but in code, in essays, in videos, in art, in dreams. They are being written by curious children, by solitary thinkers, by stubborn truth-seekers who refuse to let the flame die. You might be one of them. You don't need a grand hall or a marble desk. You only need silence and time and the courage to ask. Ask why. Ask how. Ask what if. Because every question is a match struck in the dark, and enough questions lit together can illuminate a path through even the deepest ignorance. But it is not enough to gather knowledge. We must protect it, and protection, in this age, does not mean hiding it away. It means keeping it honest, open, contextual, free from manipulation, free from fear. You see, the danger today is not fire. It is distortion. History rewritten to serve politics. Science reshaped to serve profit. Memory reduced to content. Truth bent until it breaks. This is the new burning, and it is silent. No smoke, no ashes. Just the quiet disappearance of understanding beneath layers of noise. So what do? We become librarians, not of buildings, of minds. We cultivate discernment. We teach context. We encourage slow thought in a fast world. We read widely and doubt gently and refuse to let anger do our thinking. We remind each other that knowledge is not opinion shouted loudest, but truth earned patiently. We carry the scrolls not in our hands, but in our questions, and we pass them on, not by force, but by example. This is the Alexandria of now, and though it has no columns, it still needs guardians. It still needs you. Yes, you who listens in the quiet, who lingers through the long rhythms of history, who wonders why these stories matter. They matter because you matter. Because every mind that opens in humility and courage becomes a shelter for the flame. You may not change the world alone, but you will keep a part of it from going dark. And that is no small thing. Now, let me leave you with one more image. You are walking, alone, in the ruins of an ancient city. The stars above are cold and bright. The earth beneath you is cracked with time. And there, just ahead, is a single door. It's small, wooden, worn. You open it inside. The room is empty, except for a single shelf. Upon that shelf sits one book. No title, no markings. You pick it up. You open it, and to your quiet surprise, the pages are blank until you touch them. And then, slowly, carefully, words begin to appear. Your questions, your fears, your stories, your truths. This is the book that only you can write. This is the scroll that Alexandria never held but waited for. All the same, it is not too late. The fire still lives, not in marble halls, not in ancient myths, but here, in the quiet courage to learn, to question, to remember, to imagine, and, as long as you carry that courage, the library is never truly lost. It walks with you wherever you go. You're still here. That tells me something. Not just that you're curious, but that you feel it too. That gentle ache in the soul. The quiet tension between what was lost and what might still be saved. That longing for something older than us, yet still alive in us. Let us keep walking. No need to hurry. The road stretches ahead like a ribbon of thought, and the night is long enough to hold it all. We've walked through Alexandria's marble shadows. We've felt the smoke sting our imagination. We've watched the fire, and then traced it as it flickered across time, changing shape but never truly fading. But there's still more, because the fall of knowledge doesn't happen just once. It repeats out. Sometimes it's loud like the smashing of printing presses, the banning of books, the exiling of thinkers. But more often, it's quiet. A curriculum trimmed, a voice silenced in a meeting, a truth left out of a textbook. A child laughed at 4 asking too many questions. The fire doesn't need flames anymore. just neglect, just silence. We assume progress is inevitable, that once a truth is discovered, it cannot be forgotten. But history says otherwise. Truth is fragile. Memory is perishable. Ideas must be tended, like gardens, like fires, and every generation is given a choice to preserve or to forget, to protect or to distort, to share or to hoard. Let me take you now, not to the past, but to the near-present, to dusty classrooms in underfunded schools, to libraries closed for lack of budget, to archives that crumble while decision-makers debate their relevance, to stories never translated, studies never funded, questions never asked because they might make someone uncomfortable. This is how the modern library burns. Slowly, bureaucratically, politely, and still there are guardians, not in robes or armor, but in denim and silence. Teachers who stay after class, archivists who digitize by candlelight, readers who raise their hands when it's easier not to, parents who teach their children history that the state prefers to forget, youth who question the narratives handed. To them, these are the librarians of now. Invisible, tireless, brave, and our weapons are simple. Curiosity, memory, patience, and refusal. Refusal to let stories die. Refusal to accept ignorance as virtue. Refusal to bow to the comfort of forgetting. Because forgetting is always easier than wrestling with guilt, easier than confronting systems we benefit from, easier than seeing ourselves as part of the same story we critique. But forgetting is also a betrayal of the thinkers who came before, of the generations who tried to leave us something better, of the children yet to come who will ask us one day, "What did you protect for me?" So let us pause again in the library of the mind. Let's open another scroll, not of science or poetry this time, but of silence, because what isn't written often speaks loudest. The silences in our textbooks, the gaps in our museums, the missing voices in our documentaries, the erased names in our family trees. Every culture has stories it hides, and sometimes the most sacred work we can do is to find them again, dust them off. Listen to hear the songs that were never recorded, the prayers in languages now extinct, the warnings whispered before catastrophe, the laughter that no longer echoes. We cannot restore what was lost, but we can remember it, name it, and in doing so, we give it a second life. You see, memory is resurrection. When we speak the names of those forgotten, when we carry their words, even in fragments, we turn ghosts into ancestors, and ancestors become guides. So what stories have you inherited? Not the official ones, the secret ones, the ones passed quietly in kitchens, the ones wrapped in shame or grief or hope, the ones that flicker in your blood when you hear certain music, or smell certain spices, or stand before a certain ruin. That, too, is Alexandria, hidden, fragmented, sacred. Don't let it fade. Don't wait for permission to remember. Because this world will not hand you a scroll and say, "This is your heritage, you must gather it yourself, from shards, from whispers, from things left unsaid." And when you do, when you piece together your own personal library, however humble, however scattered, you join the oldest tradition of all, the tradition of those who refuse to forget. Let me show you one more thing. It's late now, the world is hushed. But somewhere, in a town whose name you'll never know, a girl is reading by flashlight beneath her bedsheets. The book in her hands is old, borrowed, falling apart. But to her, it's everything. It makes her feel seen. It makes her question everything. It makes her wonder what else the world has kept from her. And in that moment, though, she doesn't know it. She becomes part of the line, the lineage of quiet rebels, gentle scholars, invisible sages. She is lighting a new flame, and one day she will teach someone else, and the library will live on. That's how it survives. Not through walls of stone, not through institutions, but through people, ordinary, curious, unafraid people like you. So sleep. When you're ready, let the candle burn low. Let your dreams wander through marble corridors and digital archives alike. But when you wake, remember the fire. Tend it, protect it, and when you meet someone lost in the dark, Offer them a spark, because it only takes one. And from that single ember, the library can rise again, quietly, softly, forever. You're still with me, even after all this time, through smoke and scrolls. Through silence and memory you've kept walking, and that tells me something deeper than curiosity. It tells me you've become a part of this story, not just a listener, not a bystander, a bearer of the fire. Let us keep moving, slow and steady, not forward, not backward, but inward. Because now, we come to the quietest chamber of all, the place in every society, every generation, where knowledge isn't just forgotten or distorted, but deliberately hidden, buried, not by time, not by accident, but by intention. This, perhaps, is the darkest part of the library, the forbidden wing, the chamber of locked doors and sealed mouths, of erased names, of disappeared voices, because when those in power feel threatened by knowledge, they don't always burn it. Sometimes, they simply hide it, move it behind curtains, strip it from curriculum, brand it unpatriotic, call it unverified, call it dangerous. This is not new. It happened in Alexandria too. Even in that legendary place of learning, there were limits. Not every scroll was equally safe. Not every thinker equally welcomed. And even the wisest minds bowed, sometimes when the politics turned sharp, and the empire frowned, because knowledge is powerful. And those who wield power have always known one thing: the easiest way to control a people is to control their past. Erase it, rewrite it, replace it with a more convenient myth, and then, when the time is right, claim that the myth was always the truth. That is how empires build their foundations, not just with stone, but with silence. We must ask, then, what parts of our own story have we sealed away? Which histories have we hidden because they embarrassed us? Whose names have we forgotten, not because they were unimportant, but because they were inconvenient? Which truths sit at the bottom of locked archives, waiting for someone brave enough to blow off the dust? Because even in the digital age, especially, in the digital age, a sure has become an art. A subtle one. Algorithms that hide, platforms that bury, policies that favor the loudest, not the wisest. We think everything is available now, but that's the collusion. Not everything that exists is allowed to be seen, and not everything that is seen is true. In this strange, glowing era of endless scrolling, we are flooded with information and, yet parched for understanding. Because while data is abundant, context is rare, and truth is quieter than ever. It does not shout, it does not trend, it waits, buried in footnotes, lost in translation, hidden beneath centuries of power's fingerprints. But here's the miracle. Truth is stubborn. You can hide it, deny it, mock it, erase it, but you can't kill it, because every now and then someone finds a shard, a line in a letter, a quote in a forgotten manuscript, a story passed down in whispers, and from that single fragment, a whole truth can be rebuilt, painstakingly, gently, courageously. This is the work of memory, restoration, and it is sacred, because the library isn't just a place where we keep what we know. It's the place where we go to rediscover what we were meant to forget. So let me ask you gently, but seriously, what do you remember that others have forgotten? What stories live in you that history books do not carry? What wounds? What lessons? What warnings? You don't need credentials to preserve a scroll. You only need care. Maybe you remember your grandmother's stories tales she told in a language that no one in your city speaks anymore. Maybe you carry the songs of a village, no map lists. Maybe you remember a protest no one filmed, a kindness no one recorded, a cruelty no one punished. These too are the scrolls of our time. And if you do not carry them forward, they vanish, not with fire, with neglect, but if you speak them, if you write them, if you whisper them to those who listen, the library grows, quietly, humbly, powerfully, and the fire spreads again, not in destruction, but in illumination. Because the truest power of the ancient Library of Alexandria wasn't the number of scrolls it held. It was the vision, the belief that every culture had something worth preserving. That truth was bigger than empire. That curiosity was sacred. That wisdom could come from anywhere. That more than anything, is what was burned. Not just parchment, but the idea that no knowledge should be forbidden. And if we are to honor that idea not just with words, but with action, then we must become keepers of uncomfortable truths. We must listen to voices we've been taught to ignore. We must make space for stories that unsettle us, because real learning begins where comfort ends. The library asks much of us. It asks for humility. It asks for patience. It asks for courage. And it asks us to keep going. Even when the shelves are half empty, and the air smells faintly of ashdot. And now, you've come this far. The night is thick now, but the path is clear, and ahead of us, through the mist, another door waits. This one is made of something strange. Not wood, not stone, but something shifting like woven memory. You open it. Inside is a room you've never seen, but somehow recognized, that is quiet. It is infinite, and the shelves are not filled with books. They are filled with people, their lives, their dreams, their failures, their words. Each person a scroll, a page, a footnote, each one a flame. This is the living library, and you are already inside it. You haven't left. Not even now, as the hours grow stiller. As the hush around you deepens into something that almost feels sacred. The world outside may be winding down, forgetting itself in dreams and sleep. But you are remembering, not just Alexandria, not just scrolls and stones, but the idea behind it all. The idea that knowledge matters, that memory deserves guardians, that silence, when chosen, can be beautiful, but when enforced, becomes erasure. So let's keep moving, gently, one breath at a time, because tonight, we reach a threshold. We've spoken of what was lost. We've mourned the fire. We've wandered the ruins. We've dusted the scrolls. We've listened to forgotten voices, whispering through centuries. But now, we turn inward, because the library isn't just out there. It isn't just a place, a building, a history. It's you. You are a scroll. You carry a library inside you, stories, thoughts, questions, fragments of memory no one else holds in quite the same way. Think about that. All the books ever burned, all the knowledge ever lost. And yet, in your ordinary human mind, there are echoes that no fire could reach, moments, faces, feelings, unwritten things. You are living parchment, and the ink isn't dry. It writes itself, each day through what you notice, what you value, what you preserve. So tonight, as the hush of history presses close, ask yourself, what do I carry? What wisdom has no name, but still lives in me? What pain am I the only one to remember? What hope refuses to fade, even when the world insists it should? Because in the age of Alexandria, knowledge was stored in halls of marble and guarded by scholars, in robes. But in this age, the most precious truths may live in places no algorithm can find, in gestures, in lullabies, in rituals passed from hand to hand, in scars, in laughter, in quiet resistance. And those truths, though fragile, can survive anything. If we share them, that's how the fire spreads. Not in grand declarations, but in moments of connection. A story told over tea, a child asking why, and someone taking the time to answer, a question written in a journal no one else will read. A truth spoken aloud. Even when the room falls silent afterward, each act is a flame. Each flame, a defiance of forgetting. And each defiance, a rebuilding. Of the library. Slow, personal, unstoppable. But let's be honest, it isn't easy. There are days when the silence seems safer, when remembering hurts, when asking feels foolish, when it seems like no one cares if we forget. There are days when the fire flickers, and still, you are here listening. That, in itself, is an act of preservation, an act of care, and care is how civilizations survive, not through conquest, but through quiet tending. Let me show you something else. Across time, across continents, others have done this work too. In whispered languages, kept alive through song. In secret gatherings, where banned books were read by candlelight. In hidden rooms where refugees passed stories so that their children might remember who they were. The burning library isn't just a metaphor, it's a cycle. It burns, and it rebuilds, it forgets, and then someone remembers that someone is always ordinary. A scribe, a student, a grandmother, a rebel, a child, maybe. Because the grand structures always fall eventually. But the quiet ones, the ones built in hearts and homes, they endure. And now, the question returns. Softly, steadily, what will you do with your scroll? You don't need to publish. You don't need to teach. You don't need a platform, or a following, or a degree. You only need to remember and share, even if it's just one story, one idea, one moment you refuse to let vanish. That's how the library lives, not through monuments, but through moments. Let me leave you with one more image. You are standing on a cliff at dawn. Behind you, the ruins of a city, columns toppled, domes cracked, silence clinging to stone. Before you, the sea, vast, endless, waiting in your hands. A single, fragile scroll, the last of its kind. There's no one to pass it to. No library left to receive it. And so, after a long breath, you step forward and cast it into the waves, not in despair, in hope, because you believe that somewhere, someone will find it. Maybe in a week, maybe in a century, maybe when the world is ready again. And when they do, they'll open it, not with force, but with reverence, and they'll read it, and understand, and rebuild. That is the legacy of Alexandria. Not what was lost, but what might still be found. Not the fire that consumed, but the fire that endured. And now, the shelf is yours. The ink is yours. The next scroll waits, and the world, though noisy and fast, and often forgetful, still needs your remembering, still needs your voice, still needs your quiet flame. Let it burn. Still listening, still breathing with the rhythm of this ancient grief. This quiet defiance, this flame that refuses to be extinguished. And perhaps, you've noticed something by now. The silence has changed. It's not just the absence of noise anymore. It feels like presence, like standing in a vast, echoing hall of memory, where the air itself carries meaning, where even stillness tells a story. That is what happens when a fire passes through at first. It destroys, then it reveals. Ash clears, away distraction. Smoke forces attention, and in the scorched soil of ruin, new things grow, lowly, tenderly. This is the part of the story that doesn't get told enough. Not just the fall, not just the flames, but what came after. Because Alexandria didn't simply vanish when the last ember died. It changed, it transformed, and so did those who survived it. The scribes, the thinkers, the wanderers who had memorized fragments of wisdom and carried them, like burning coals from village to village. They were not scholars in grand robes anymore. They were refugees. They were fugitives of the mind. And yet, they remembered. They kept stories alive, not in books, but in breath, in rhythm, in melody. They became living libraries. And that's where we are now, in this moment, in the after. The ruins are all around us. But so are the seeds. You see, knowledge never truly dies. Not if it's loved. Not if it's passed down. Not if it finds a willing vessel. And what is a vessel, really? A mind that listens. A heart that cares. A voice that chooses not to forget. That's you. That's what you've been doing all along, whether you knew it or not. You've been catching the embers. You've been tending the fire. And now we come to a strange truth. Sometimes the fall of a great thing is the only way to see what truly mattered inside it. Alexandria was majestic. It was unparalleled in scale and scope. But it was also flawed. Hierarchies, gatekeeping, voices excluded, truths ignored. It claimed to collect all the world's knowledge. But whose knowledge? Whose stories made it onto those scrolls? And whose were deemed unworthy? Sometimes, fire is the great equalizer. It turns marble and mud brick into the same ash. It turns sacred texts and banned letters into the same drifting smoke. It erases, yes, but it also humbles. And in that humility something sacred can begin, of quieter knowledge. Less adorned, more human. Knowledge that isn't hoarded, but shared. Imagine a grandmother telling a story by firelight that her own grandmother told her. Imagine a shepherd in the hills, humming a tune that carries ancient mathematics in its rhythm. Imagine a child asking a question no scroll ever answered, and a teacher saying, "I don't know, but let's wonder together." This is the new library. It has no walls. It needs no catalog. Its shelves are people. Its doors open wherever a question is asked with sincerity. You are already standing inside it. So the story of Alexandria, it hasn't ended. It has changed shape. Its spirit lives on, not in relics, but in rituals. Not in architecture, but in attention. Not in ownership of information, but in the stewardship of understanding. That word matters. Stewardship. It means you do not hoard. You do not gatekeep. You do not claim. You tend. You care. You offer. You share what you know with humility, knowing how much you still don't. You ask questions not to dominate, but to discover. And when someone else speaks, you listen, because libraries at their heart are places of listening. Even the silence in them is sacred, not empty, full. So listen now, not just to me, to the quiet voices in you, the forgotten fragments that rise to the surface when the world finally slows down. The lullaby your mother sang, the first poem that moved you, the question you've never stopped asking. These are your scrolls, and no fire can reach them, unless, of course, you let them die. So don't keep them alive. Speak them, write them, live them, and remember, every time you share one with someone who listens, the library grows slowly, beautifully, like a fire that doesn't destroy, but illumines. And as the embers of this part settle into quiet, let me thank you for holding space, for honoring memory, for choosing to remember even when forgetting would be easier. The night is not over yet. There is still more to discover, still deeper chambers to enter, still scrolls to unroll. When you're ready, we will continue. But for now, ... rest, and let the library within you glow a little warmer. Because Alexandria was never just a place, it was a promise. And you are keeping it. You've come so far, through ash and silence, through fire and breath, through memory and mourning, and all the soft echoes that lined the marble halls of Alexandria's vanished mind. And now, at last, we arrive at the edge of it all, not the edge of destruction, but the threshold of something new. Can you feel it? That strange hush, not of loss, but of readiness, as if the story itself is leaning forward, watching you, waiting, because it knows something you're only now beginning to believe. This ending isn't really an end. Not for you, not for the ideas we've carried, not for the fire we've passed, palm to palm, story to story, through the dark. You see, all stories end, eventually, but the echo of a story, the truth that outlives the telling, that's eternal. And this one, the story of the Library of Alexandria, was never really about scrolls, or statues, or scholars, cloaked in ivory robes. It was always about longing, the human longing to know, to understand, to preserve, to matter, and, yes, we lost something precious. We lost volumes that will never be read. We lost voices silenced forever, maps erased, histories smudged beyond recovery, but the story didn't die with them. Because you're still here. Because as long as someone is listening, someone is remembering. Someone is wondering. Alexandria lives on, and not as a ruin, as a ritual. Let's return to that place. One last time, just for a moment. The fires have burned out. The columns have crumbled. The ocean wind moves through the broken library like a ghost, carrying no words, just salt and silence. But beneath the rubble, a single stone remains, a corner of flooring, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and upon it, not a scroll, but a mirror. You bend over it, not because it shows your face, but because it reflects what you carry, and what you carry is vast. You carry every story that moved you, every question that opened a door, every silence you dared to fill with your voice. You carry sorrow, and resilience, and hope. You carry the fingerprints of forgotten thinkers, etched into your choices. And as you stand there, at the edge of this ancient site, something becomes clear. Alexandria didn't fall in a single night. and you won't rebuild it in one either. But that doesn't mean you don't start. You start small, with a conversation, a notebook, a poem scratched in the margin of a daydream. You start by listening more carefully, by asking better questions, by honoring what others tried to preserve even when they failed. You start by tending the fire, not to destroy, but to warm. And suddenly, you understand something else. This was never just history, it was a call, not to mourn but to remember, not to weep but to rebuild, not to worship the ashes but to plant in them. So maybe, just maybe, you take this story now and carry it forward. Not as a lecture, not as a lesson, but as a seed. You tuck it inside the folds of your day, and someday, without realizing it, you'll offer it to someone else, a child, a stranger, a friend, in need of remembering. And when you do, the library will open. Again, not with walls, but with wonder. Not with scrolls, but with souls. And the fire that once consumed it will light your way forward. So yes, this is where the story pauses, where the voice softens, where the page turns for the last time. But listen closely now. Can you hear that? In the space between words, in the quiet between breaths, a heartbeat, a promise, that soft, steady hum of knowledge choosing to live. And as the night wraps around you, like the hush of ancient stone, may you carry this truth gently. You are the library now, and you will not burn.